I would have quit video games entirely if it wasn't for these two MMOs teaching me how to appreciate and love gaming once again. And you might be wondering how two 20-year-old games were able to do that. To understand that, I think we're going to have to go all the way back to when I first started this channel over a year ago.
Hey guys, how's it going?
You see, when I first started this channel, I was just getting off of a multiple year stint where all I played was nothing but first-person shooters. During the end of that stint, I was starting and really beginning to feel like gaming was becoming a second job. One where I would come home from work, instead of just being able to log in and play and unwind for a couple hours, I would then instead have to do hours of research on what tactics or guns were that day's new meta. Then I would have to practice my aim. And finally, after a couple of hours, I would be able to eventually load into a game with the boys. Now admittedly, my friends were not nearly as competitive as I was, and they mostly just wanted to log in and have some fun like some reasonable adult. So to nobody's surprise, eventually we would get shit on over and over again, and I would inevitably rage quit. And this vicious cycle would go on and on for roughly about, give or take, 2 years. Until eventually, I stepped away from gaming in the spring of 2023, and I started to spend a lot of time enjoying the outdoors and just embracing life away from video games. This would see me getting back into fishing, hitting the gym and working out again, even going to the beach. I was finally socializing with friends and family, and just genuinely becoming an all-around better version of myself. But eventually the warm weather started to fade, and the cold winds of winter started to creep back in. And anyone listening here that also experiences cold, frigid winters can vouch for me when I say, there are few feelings that are better in life than looking outside and seeing a miserable day and shutting the blinds, finding some place comfy inside, and loading up your favorite video game. And that's exactly what I did, except this time was different. Instead of going right back into a hate spiral of FPS games and spending hours upon hours dedicated to training my aim, I decided to load up a game that was incredibly different. That's right, guys, we're going all the way back to the early 2000s. Back to the days of dial-up internet. A time when I was only allowed a couple hours a night to play. In those days, the scariest thing that could ever happen to you was your mom getting a phone call, which would then kick you off the internet and prevent you from returning to your friends for sometimes hours. But times are a little bit different now. The beauty of high-speed fiber optic internet has really began to heal all those past childhood traumas of mine. And it was now, once again, time to head back into the lands of Gielinor. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If not, go ahead and flame me down in the comments. The home of the graphically underwhelming point-and-click RPG game known as RuneScape. A game that latched right onto mine and so many other kids' dopamine receptors back in the early to mid 2000s. It was completely unbeknownst to myself at the time, but this game was going to be the beginning stages of me actually being able to enjoy gaming once again. For those of you who don't know, RuneScape, or more directly, old school RuneScape, is an MMORPG, and a very slow-moving point-and-click MMO at that. So as you can imagine, it was quite literally one of the most polar opposite games that I could have chosen when you compare it to fast-paced competitive FPS shooters. But I believe deep within that slow-moving, outdated gameplay is where the magic truly happened. You see, outside of the first early levels, RuneScape is an incredibly grindy, long journey. This is not some kind of flashy, adrenaline-filled kind of game. Now that's not saying that the old school RuneScape development team haven't done a phenomenal job of adding in some incredibly challenging and rewarding content. It's not that kind of game. It's not the kind of game where you would see a bunch of ADHD, Adderall addicted, 360, no scope, barrel roll kind of action. And almost immediately, I found out that the game was forcing me to learn and accept how to slow down, to stop, to relax, and just enjoy being able to be in the moment and enjoy the process of just playing. Regardless if I was chopping some willows outside Draenor Village, or I was taking down Jad for the very first time and earning my very first fire cape. I was enthralled with just existing in the world. I wasn't in some constant competition I wasn't trying to keep up with some ever-changing meta that was forcing me to try and play as sweaty as possible or risk losing my high KD. I was finally able to sit down and appreciate the time and effort that the developers had put into their game. Developers of a game that they themselves most likely actually play and enjoy. I was finally able to enjoy some of the most well thought out and intriguing quests and storylines that I've ever experienced in any game, regardless of genre. Whereas I know before, I'm absolutely sure the old me would have 100% just smashed the skip button on anything and everything, trying to reach the end game as fast as possible. Sometimes I would travel all over the world just for the fun of it. Just to be able to experience the world like I did all those years ago as a kid. As things started to unravel, I started to feel like I was less and less trapped in a hamster wheel that was driven by greed and fueled by profits. I was no longer playing a game where the developers and publishers only viewed me as a dollar sign. One where they're only trying to get me to buy a new battle pass, expansion, or skin. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. Now, I'm not naive, and I understand that at the end of the day, behind every video game is a company, and every company is a business, and every business aims for consistent, tangible growth rates year after year, because that's how businesses thrive, and more importantly, that's how businesses survive. I just think that somewhere in the last decade, there's been a major shift, where back in the day, games were being made with money and profits being seen as a necessary evil. They were the things that you had to think about in order to keep the lights on. But at their core, it was always just a group of individuals who would come together to bring life to their creativity solely for the enjoyment of all of us, the fans. Now fast forward to today, and now all I can see is games being optimized with profits being put first and enjoyment second. And if players do happen to get some enjoyment out of it, hey, that's cool too. But really, they just want you to swipe that little credit card. It was nice to be in a game whose developers saw firsthand the repercussions of not listening to your player base and solely focusing on profits. A game whose ship was, for all intents and purposes, being steered by the player base with actual community polls about what and what not was going to be added into the game. The entire reason that old school RuneScape exists in the first place was due to greed, but that's a tale for another story, as I believe that Jagex has learned that the real power truly lies in the hands, or more so, the wallets of the players. And history has shown that we've all walked away once, and we're not scared to do it again. The other game, Responsible, actually comes from a company who could easily take the top 3 in anyone's list of the most greedy gaming companies of all time. In fact, this is a company who I'm 99% sure has a sign that reads "Profits over Passion" on every employee's cubicle. I am, of course, talking about classic World of Warcraft. Now, World of Warcraft was a game for myself and many others, a huge part of our childhood. But during classic World of Warcraft's first 2019 release, I was so deeply entrenched into the lands of PUBG, Rust, and Warzone that nothing, frankly, was going to pull me away. Plus, I think deep down, at the time, I felt like I had outgrown the MMO genre, and I definitely felt like classic World of Warcraft had very little to offer me in terms of enjoyment. And guys, I wish I could go back and slap that little shit version of myself for ever thinking that. I couldn't have been more wrong. As some of you may know, in November of 2024, Blizzard released the anniversary edition of Classic, or Vanilla WoW. This was basically a one-to-one copy of World of Warcraft from 2004. This time with some much appreciated quality of life improvements and a much faster life cycle. So my story goes, one night after work, while I was busy doom scrolling through YouTube, I stumbled upon the release trailer for the Anniversary Realms. And almost immediately as I watched it, I felt that sweet, creeping feeling of nostalgia crawling its way back in. So a couple of days go by, but eventually I decided, you know what? I'm just gonna take the plunge and we're gonna give it a try. I'm thinking to myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? I give Blizzard another $15 one last time and walk away feeling a little screwed? Well, guys, That was a little over 4 months ago, and I'm still here. The classic version of this game is just so vastly different from the World of Warcraft that I had last played, which, if I recall correctly, was at the tail end of the Legion expansion. And I know this is such a cliche at this point, but the game is about the journey, the adventure, the one-of-a-kind interactions with strangers, interactions that are never identical to each other, unless they involve a hunter. Then we all know those are pretty much universally bad. Just like I did in RuneScape, I was falling in love with the feeling of being free to explore a vast open world, and I was beholden to only my imagination and my desires. Somewhere on these journeys in old school RuneScape and World of Warcraft, I started caring less and less about being the best, and I started caring more and more about having fun. I was starting to see myself exploring just for the sake of exploring, enjoying the small talk with other players while fishing, or just appreciating the ambiance of these big, beautiful worlds. I had rekindled my love for video games, and it wasn't due to some brand new flash-in-the-pan game. I truly believe I owe it solely to these two games and their different approach to how games were meant to be enjoyed, as marathons rather than as sprints. And my love of gaming was rejuvenated by two 20-year-old MMOs that I hadn't thought of in over a decade. Now I want to say, this is not meant to come off as me saying that you cannot or are not already having a boatload of fun in other games or other genres such as first-person shooters, MOBAs, or other highly competitive genres. That actually couldn't be further from the truth. The truth that I uncovered was the problem wasn't with the games. The problem was with me all along, and my personal mindset of always trying to be the best. You know how I talked about earlier how my friends used to have no problems getting on, cracking a couple brewskis, and laughing the night away? They didn't have a single shit to give whether we won or we lost. And that's something that I honestly feel like at the time I was very, very envious of. And it took me finally stepping away from gaming for a while to realize that my issues stemmed solely from me and my mindset. Had I have realized this earlier, I could have been having fun with my friends on those types of games all along. So if you're finding yourself in a similar situation to what I've just described, my advice to you is take a step back. Remember, games are meant to be enjoyable. And if they're starting to feel like a chore, I think that's the world trying to tell you, like it told me, that it's time for a breather and to get out into the world and enjoy it for a while. You see, summer is approaching us here in the States rather quickly, and it's the perfect time for a little video game detox. So I encourage you to get out there and enjoy the soon-to-be beautiful weather. And when you do return, I challenge you to step outside of your usual comfort zone and try a different game or even a completely different genre. Who knows? It might just change your entire perspective like it did with mine. I want to say thank you to anyone and everyone who has made it this far. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video, as it was one that I was excited to make. And if you're going through what I talked about in the video, let me know down in the comments. And don't forget to drop by the Discord sometime and come hang out with not just me, but all the beautiful people in the community. Also, shameless plug, if you're a fan of World of Warcraft, come check out my brand new World of Warcraft Hardcore Challenge, where I attempt to make it to level 60 on a PvP server. And if I get killed by a player, I have to delete my character. As always, this is Deadmans, and I'll see you all in the next video.